Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Maybe you could just kick off with a brief introduction to this really unique film. What can people expect when they watch it?
Well, I hope it's something that maybe unexpected. I don't know. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was kind of goes back to what I love about documentary, which is you didn't know where it was going when it started, and you didn't know how things would unfold, and it and we sort of just went along for the journey to try to capture it in the best way possible.
Mm. And I guess, Robert Downey Jr., one of those sort of faces, household name. We've seen him in so many things. But, I didn't really know actually that much about his father. I didn't know that much about his past, and kind of, when he'd grown up kind of in the movie world. Yeah. So probably for a lot of other viewers, it's kind of going to be an eye-opening experience. Maybe you can talk a bit about the genesis of the project from your side. How did you kind of become involved in it? And what was really the appeal for you in making the documentary?
Well, it started with, I had a meeting at Robert Downey Jr.'s production company and threw out the idea of doing a documentary with Robert or on Robert, and quickly got word back that he had no interest in doing a documentary, but he thought that somebody should do something on his dad. And so that really was the start of it. And at that point, Kevin Ford, who I filmed with, we started visiting Senior at his home in New York. And that's where it started. So it was really, at the beginning, was just a portrait of a maverick filmmaker from the late 60s, 70s that had this really amazing body of work that was truly unique, and that's what it was. And then it obviously, for anyone that sees the movie, it sort of went in a different direction and became more of a movie about a relationship between a father and son, and sort of, some of the unexpected things that happened to us all, obviously.
Mm. And what's really fascinating about watching it is the sort of form of the film seems to reflect kind of this world that we're drawn into with his father, which is very loose and sort of, non-linear, and, there's not always a clear narrative. And I almost wonder, as a documentary maker, perhaps you started off with an idea in your mind of, okay, well, this is the documentary I'm going to make. And you too kind of got pulled into this world. And that's how the form of the film itself is kind of a bit whimsical in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every movie, you want to reflect the subject in some way, right? And so I think in this case, Senior definitely had a huge impact in the way that we thought about the movie. We ended up shooting the movie in black and white just because he was always trying to challenge us to think differently about the way that we not only thought about every scene in particular, but just in the way that we thought about filmmaking in general. And so, in making the film black and white, a lot of his early work was in black and white, and so it was an opportunity to sort of take the audience and put you into his world at the start.
I was going to ask about the black and white, actually, because it immediately does have an impact, kind of the way everything looks, and maybe makes you sort of feel like you've stepped into another. I remember that film where, half the film's in black and white and half it goes into color, and it does make you feel that you're in another world. And, when did that decision come in? Was that early on?
It was pretty early on. Senior was trying to just, how can you do things in a way that hadn't been done before, or at least for yourself personally. I'd never worked on a documentary that was in black and white. But what was so nice about it, when his career transitions into color and he starts making movies in color, they just sort of jump off the screen in a way that I don't think they would have before. And you really sort of appreciate that evolution. But it was nice because I felt like we really wanted to put people into Senior's world and have them get to know him. So it was a way that every time you come back to the black and white, you really enter his universe at that point.
And of course, there's so many different pieces that kind of are put together. So you've got, the interviews, their conversations over Zoom, and then you've got all this incredible archive material. I mean, what was it like going back, and how familiar were you with his body of work and finding these most amazing clips of, some of it really off the wall stuff?
Yeah, I had known one of his films called Putney's Swope, which I think a lot of people that went if they went to film school, probably were aware of. I didn't know the others, sort of took a crash course before we started and got more familiar with his work. You know, to be honest, Robert Downey Jr. was probably our best research tool in terms of finding like the great moments, because he had lived with these movies his whole life. So there were so many great things that like we pulled, but in the end, he'd be like, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this. And so that helped us sort of like make sure that, you know, that we were able to find and pull the best moments.
Mm. And also what kind of shifts throughout the film is, you know, at some points, is the camera really on senior, or is it on junior, or is it on both, or is it on their relationship? And I guess there's this thing that's being circled slightly through the, you know, at least the first half of the film, of their relationship and, you know, perhaps sort of mistakes that were made. I don't know how you want to put it with, you know, when Robert was younger. So how is that for you as a filmmaker? Kind of, it was maybe the elephant in the room at some times to say, well, actually this upbringing kind of, you know, did it lead to his sort of period of addiction and so on and so forth?
It definitely wasn't the elephant in the room. Very early on, Robert was like, we're not making a rosy portrait of our relationship, because it wasn't all roses, you know. Mm-hmm. And he was very clear about that. But I think there was an undeniable connection and love between these two people so I think that push and pull was what made the film interesting. And I think that I think a lot of us have had, you know, that there's a real universality in terms of the relationship between parents and children that we all have and we all experience. And I think that those are the things that I was excited about, because you have two larger than life personalities. Yeah, that there was something very relatable and human about the movie that I think came together in the end.
And I think Robert says, you know, Junior says at some point, something like, oh, I can see that he's trying to deflect attention. I'm trying to get to the bottom of something here, and he keeps deflecting. And he sort of wants some kind of answer from him, maybe explanation, or whether he's looking, I don't know, for an apology. Do you think that he got what he wanted in that sense?
I mean, that's a good question. I know that before COVID happened, you know, Robert talked about wanting to go have this conversation with his dad to kind of talk about everything that had transpired in their lives. And then COVID happened, and that kind of morphed into this dialogue that becomes kind of the spine of the movie, which is these Zoom sort of video calls that they have with each other, where his dad is in New York and Robert's in LA. I think in the end, Robert does go to have this final conversation with him, but in some ways it's almost too late, you know. And but to me, there's something very poetic about that idea of, like, you know, how important is that really then about, you know, the full life experience and journey that you have with somebody. I don't know if he feels that way, but as a filmmaker and somebody looking at what we tried to put together, that was my personal takeaway from it. And it was, you know, I think that one thing is evident is, like, you know, our time is finite, and that it was a reminder to sort of try to connect with the people that, you know, are important to you while there's time, you know.
Mm. I think in the end, it almost seems like that clip that you show actually from many years ago, where he's got, you know, his arm around him and saying, yeah, you know, like, I don't know what we were thinking. We thought it was fun to include them in the smoking and everything. And it's almost like maybe that was really the moment of admission that, you know, doesn't quite materialize again, but it was there, it was said, and he did know.
Yeah, I think he definitely realized. I mean, Senior at that point was beyond his years of using drugs, and I think he had a perspective that allowed him to understand the mistakes that they had made. I think Junior at that point wasn't through it, and I think, you know, I think he still harbors resentment for that, for that. But at the same time, I think that you see a lot of love and compassion and forgiveness throughout the movie. And you know, I think when things aren't always black and white is one of the most interesting, and I definitely think it has definitely all the shades of gray are represented.
Mm. The other thing that I thought was brilliant is that the senior was editing his own version of the film in parallel, which kind of, ebbed and flowed into, I guess, your final version. I mean, what was it like working with him and having those moments with him? And, is there a finished, different version of the film floating around somewhere?
There is another version of the movie that does exist. I think, so Robert Downey Sr., I think the reason that he allowed us to make the movie, I think he was just excited that there were two people with cameras around that he could sort of commandeer and sort of do his own, what he wanted to do. Very quickly after we started shooting, he decided he not only wanted to direct what we were filming, but also start directing the edit, which for me in the end was the best thing that could have happened, because it took his focus away from what we were trying to do and allowed us to make the movie that we were hoping to make. And, I think that he felt like he could rest assured knowing that the real version of the movie was done and he had done it and he was happy with it.
And I think, you can see so much about the kind of creative person he was and, how his output was the way it was. Because there was one interview, wasn't it, with the actor Arkin, where he cut out all of it except the bit where he says, I'm going to go and get a kumquat or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's kind of, that for him is the interesting moment, not all the other stuff.
No, and I don't, the funny thing is when you realize that that's the part he took, you're like, maybe he was right. I don't know. Like, I think we definitely appreciated, a huge fan of his sensibility and the way that he looked at not only the world, but his films in general. And it was very inspiring to be around.
And of course, I don't know, obviously you weren't going to know how much longer he had for the rest of his life. And the fact that ending came in the making of the film, and then there's that last sort of scene where they're having the memorial. I mean, what was that like to be sort of part of that journey as a filmmaker? And it seemed very moving in lots of ways.
I mean, getting to know Senior was I feel so lucky that this meeting happened at the Downey office that led us to Kevin and I to start filming with Senior, because I feel like, we were able to capture that little bit of his spirit and essence that I think makes the movie work so well, is that you get to know him before things change. And I think it would have been a very difficult movie to make looking back, because so much of Senior's work was one thing, and it's great and fun to look at, but I think him as a person is what really makes the movie special. And I just feel so grateful that we started when we started. We were able to capture a little bit of his spirit, before things sort of evolved and changed,
And it's a great testament as well to kind of the power of art as a medium. I guess on the one hand, just to kind of capture these people, their relationship, his past, but also the making of the film was something that kind of kept him alive and sort of kept his mind alive. Just him being able to channel, something into that creative prospect. So, that's kind of, an amazing thing that also comes out of the film.
I think being a filmmaker, I could think of nothing better than in my final days to be like connected and passionate and involved in making another film. I mean, and so I think in that way, it was undeniable that was happening, and it was nice. It was nice to witness and to be a part of.
And, in terms of the takeaways and the themes you think that come out of it, of course, we're seeing another side to Robert Downey Jr. We're discovering things about the senior that we didn't know, but we're also looking at a father-son relationship and how in those later parts of your life, how we do want to reach back and reconnect and maybe not look for redemption, but just kind of, reach a point of, acceptance.
Yeah. Well said.
So, what do you hope people will take away from watching your film?
I subscribe to the Robert Downey Sr. School of hoping, not trying to be prescriptive in what people take away from it, because I think everyone's life experience is different, and they'll take different things away based on their journey, right? And so, but I definitely think that obviously there's an element of the film that is a meditation on existence and life, and you know, that I think anytime we see things like that, hopefully they're inspiring to some degree in terms of making you sort of just reflect on your own path and sort of what's important to you.
Mm. I think there's a great line actually that he says. Junior asked him, you know, do you think people read into your films? He says, "Oh God, I hope not."
Yeah, no, I know, and I sympathize with that. You know, but I think in the end, it's like I think everything is a reflection, and everything has something that we'll take away from it, and that, you know, hopefully, you know, I just think when I grew up in the Midwest in America, and movies were my window to the world, and shaped who I was, and seeing movies that were, you know, independent films that sort of were doing things differently, like early Jim Jarmusch films and Errol Morris films and things like that, that like opened my mind. And I think that for a whole generation of people, seeing Robert Downey Sr. films, I think changed their perspective of what a movie could be, or, you know, that you could approach things in a way that hadn't been done before. And, you know, that it was so exciting to sort of uncover and discover for myself as a filmmaker.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, do you know what you're going to work on next after this? Or
Yeah, no, that's a good question. A couple of things. Yeah, there's a couple of things that we're starting out, so we'll see where they evolve to, but nothing concrete yet.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Can't wait for everyone else to be able to watch this documentary. I believe it's landing tomorrow, right, on Netflix?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Right.
Thanks so much. Lovely to chat to you. Thank you. Bye.